A shocking campus killing in a case that's already unraveling. What was meant to be a political speaking event quickly turned into one of the most horrifying moments in recent campus history. On September 10th, a public discussion at Utah Valley University ended in tragedy when conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was fatally shot in front of a live audience. Within seconds, panic spread across the campus, and what followed was a massive manhunt that gripped the nation. Charlie Kirk was answering a question from the crowd during his Prove Me Wrong tour when a single gunshot rang out. The bullet struck him in the neck, killing him almost instantly. Witnesses described chaos erupting immediately, people screaming, diving to the ground, and desperately searching for cover as they feared more shots were coming. Law enforcement locked down the campus within minutes. Emergency responders rushed in, but there was nothing they could do. The scene was described as traumatic, even by seasoned first responders. Blood covered the area, and thousands of attendees were left in shock, unsure whether the danger had passed. Initially, confusion dominated the investigation. Reports of an arrest surfaced prematurely only to be walked back hours later. Surveillance footage later showed a young man dressed in dark clothing running across rooftops and leaping between buildings. Those images became central to the manhunt, which stretched on for more than 30 tense hours. Eventually, authorities identified the suspect as 22-year-old Tyler Robinson. According to investigators, Robinson allegedly used a .3006 rifle gifted to him by his grandfather to carry out the shooting. Officials claim he climbed onto a rooftop overlooking the event and fired a single fatal shot before fleeing. The arrest did not come from a dramatic police chase. Instead, Robinson's family reportedly recognized him from the released images and urged him to turn himself in. Law enforcement confirmed that Robinson surrendered voluntarily after speaking with his parents, bringing the manhunt to an end. Prosecutors wasted little time filing charges. Robinson now faces multiple counts, including aggravated murder. If convicted, he could face the death penalty, making this one of the most serious criminal cases Utah has seen in years. As details emerged, investigators began piecing together a possible motive. According to statements later revealed in court documents, Robinson's mother told police that her son had become increasingly politically active in the year leading up to the shooting. She described a noticeable shift in his beliefs, saying he leaned more progressive and frequently clashed with family members, especially his father, over politics. Those tensions reportedly intensified when Robinson mentioned that Charlie Kirk would be speaking at Utah Valley University. Family members recalled Robinson expressing anger over the event, accusing Kirk of spreading hateful rhetoric and questioning why the university would host him. The investigation also uncovered a series of text messages Robinson allegedly sent to his roommate, messages prosecutors describe as deeply incriminating. In those exchanges, Robinson appeared to discuss planning the attack, hiding the rifle, and fearing how his family, particularly his father, would react if the weapon was never recovered. The messages suggest panic, regret, and concern over being identified. In one exchange, Robinson allegedly mentioned leaving the rifle behind and worrying about law enforcement finding it. In another, he discussed turning himself in, saying he didn't want anyone else he cared about to be harmed by the situation. Despite the apparent evidence, the case took an unexpected turn during Robinson's first court appearance. His defense team signaled that they intended to challenge not just the charges but the very people prosecuting him. In open court, Robinson's attorneys raised concerns about a potential conflict of interest within the Utah County Attorney's Office. According to the defense, a high-ranking member of the prosecution team had a personal connection to someone who was present at the shooting, a connection they argue could compromise the fairness of the entire case. This revelation set the stage for what could become a major legal battle, one that may delay proceedings and potentially force a complete change in who prosecutes this high-profile murder. And that is where this case begins to move from a straightforward criminal prosecution into far more complicated territory. The text messages, the motive, and the defense's explosive claim. As prosecutors prepared to move forward with one of Utah's most high-profile murder cases, the defense introduced a claim that could dramatically alter the path of justice. At the center of their argument is a conflict of interest they say threatens Tyler Robinson's constitutional right to a fair trial. The prosecution has leaned heavily on a series of text messages, allegedly sent by Robinson to his roommate in the hours following the shooting. These messages have been described as a virtual confession detailing planning, execution, and an attempted cover-up. In the texts, Robinson allegedly admitted he had been planning the shooting for over a week. He discussed scouting locations, noticing police presence near the event, and deciding not to return for the rifle immediately after the shooting. He also expressed anxiety over losing the firearm, which he described as his grandfather's prized possession. One message reportedly referenced engraved bullets, while another alluded to the rifle's unique scabitos. Investigators believe link Robinson directly to the murder weapon. In later messages, Robinson urged his roommate to delete the conversation and warned them not to speak to police or the media. Perhaps most telling, Robinson allegedly stated that he planned to turn himself in He mentioned that a neighbor was a sheriff's deputy and expressed concern for his loved ones, writing that they were his biggest worry. Despite the apparent strength of this evidence, Robinson's legal team insists the case is far from straightforward. During early court proceedings, they revealed plans to file a motion to disqualify the entire Utah County Attorney's office from prosecuting the case. Their argument centers on one prosecutor whose name has been redacted in court filings. According to the defense, this individual has a close personal relationship with a direct witness to the shooting, someone who was present on campus during the attack. Court documents allege that this prosecutor received real-time text updates from a family member during the shooting itself. Those messages reportedly described hearing gunshots, seeing people run, and witnessing Charlie Kirk collapse after being struck. The defense argues that this personal involvement creates a serious ethical problem. They claim the prosecutor could not objectively handle the case while also processing trauma experienced by a loved one. In their motion, Robinson's attorneys wrote that no screening measures were put in place to isolate the conflicted prosecutor from the rest of the team. They further claimed that information about the family member's experience was shared throughout the office, including with the county attorney himself. The defense insists this goes beyond one individual and contaminates the entire prosecution. Team A argued that even the appearance of bias undermines public confidence and violates Robinson's right to due process. Prosecutors, however, are expected to push back hard. They are likely to argue that thousands of people witnessed the shooting and that having a family member present does not automatically disqualify a prosecutor, especially one who believes they can remain professional and impartial still. Legal experts say perception matters. In cases involving the death penalty, even a minor ethical concern can lead to years of appeals if not addressed properly at the outset. The judge overseeing the case has already expressed concern about setting trial dates before resolving the disqualification issue. With discovery still incomplete and the conflict motion pending, the timeline for this case remains uncertain. What began as a shocking campus murder has now become a legal minefield, one that could delay justice for years and reshape how this case is ultimately prosecuted. Witness trauma and why the defense says this case is compromised beyond legal technicalities. The defense motion includes harrowing testimony that paints a vivid picture of the terror experienced on campus that day. These first-hand accounts are being used not only to describe the crime, but to reinforce why emotions surrounding the case run dangerously high. Witnesses described seeing blood pouring from Charlie Kirk's neck as he collapsed in his chair. One person wrote that they were dragged to the ground by others in the crowd and began praying, convinced they were about to die. Another said they waited for the next bullet to hit their back. Many attendees didn't witness the shooting directly, but were locked down in classrooms as alerts spread across campus. Several reported panic attacks, shaking hands, and an overwhelming fear that the shooter would return. The defense argues that this level of trauma makes impartial decision-making nearly impossible for anyone with a personal connection to the event. They emphasize that prosecutors are human beings, not machines, and that emotional bias, intentional or not, can influence judgment. According to the motion, the conflicted prosecutor's family member did not simply attend the event. They experienced it in real time, texting about gunshots, chaos, and the fatal wound. The defense claims those messages alone demonstrate emotional involvement that cannot be undone. Legal precedent supports the idea that prosecutors must remain disinterested. Courts have previously ruled that even indirect personal stakes can create an unacceptable risk of bias, especially in capital cases. The defense stresses that they are not accusing the prosecutor of misconduct or bad faith. Instead, they argue that ethical rules exist precisely to prevent situations like this, where personal experience could subconsciously affect decisions about charges, evidence, or sentencing. They further argue that, because the prosecutor discussed the situation internally, the conflict spread to the entire office. Once that happened, the defense says, there was no effective way to wall off the case, and if the judge agrees, the consequences would be significant. The Utah County Attorney's Office would be removed from the case entirely, forcing another county or a special prosecutor to step in. This would not dismiss the charges against Robinson, but it would slow the process and add yet another layer of scrutiny to an already complex case. Asterisk. What happens next? In the shadow of the death penalty, the court prepares to rule on the disqualification motion. Another major battle looms. Whether this case truly qualifies for the death penalty. Prosecutors have labeled the shooting an aggravated murder, citing the fact that it occurred in a crowded public space and endangered countless lives. However, the defense argues that those claims must be supported by specific legal standards. Under Utah law, the death penalty can only be sought if certain aggravating factors are proven. The defense maintains that firing a single shot without injuring others may not meet that threshold. They also argue that prosecutors move too quickly in signaling their intent to seek the death penalty before fully presenting evidence or allowing the defense to challenge the facts. Legal analysts say this will likely become a fierce point of contention. If the judge finds the aggravating factors insufficient, the death penalty could be taken off the table entirely. Meanwhile, the court must also consider public perception. This is a case that will be watched closely across the country. Any hint of unfairness could fuel years of appeals and undermine confidence in the verdict. If the prosecution team is disqualified, a new office would have to review the case from scratch, potentially reassessing charges, strategy, and sentencing goals. But now, Tyler Robinson remains in custody, awaiting further hearings. The families affected by this tragedy on both sides are left waiting for answers, closure, and justice. What began as a single gunshot on a university campus has become a legal storm, one that may define not only this case, but how justice is pursued when law, emotion, and public scrutiny collide. Justice on trial, public pressure, legal ethics, and an uncertain end as the courtroom doors prepare to reopen. The Tyler Robinson case stands at a crossroads. What initially appeared to be a straightforward prosecution of a campus killing has now evolved into a complex legal battle, one shaped not only by evidence, but by ethics, public trust, and the heavy shadow of capital punishment at the heart of the current dispute is a single question. Can justice truly be fair when emotion and proximity intersect with power? The defense argues that the answer is no. They maintain that when a high-ranking prosecutor has a close personal connection to someone who experienced the shooting firsthand, impartiality is no longer guaranteed, no matter how professional that prosecutor may be. From the defense's perspective, this case is not just about Tyler Robinson's guilt or innocence. It is about the integrity of the process itself. Their filings repeatedly emphasize that constitutional rights are not suspended simply because a crime is horrific or public outrage is intense. In fact, they argue, those are the moments when safeguards matter most. The prosecution, on the other hand, is expected to argue that removing an entire county attorney's office sets a dangerous precedent. If personal connections alone are enough to force disqualification, they may contend, then prosecutors in many high-profile cases could be sidelined, simply because violence often occurs in shared public spaces. This tension between ethical caution and practical reality is what the judge must now weigh. Legal experts note that judges often consider not only actual bias, but the appearance of bias. In a case this visible, perception may be just as powerful as proof. Another looming issue is timing. The court has already acknowledged delays due to incomplete discovery and unresolved motions. If the prosecution team is removed, new attorneys would need time to review thousands of pages of evidence, witness statements, forensic reports, and digital records. That process could take months or longer for the families involved. Those delays come at a cost. Charlie Kirk's supporters and loved ones want accountability and closure. Robinson's family, meanwhile, faces the possibility that their son could be sentenced to death. Both sides are trapped in a system, moving far slower than their grief or fear. The death penalty remains a pivotal and unresolved issue. While prosecutors have signaled their intent to pursue it, the defense insists the legal threshold has not yet been met. They argue that firing a single shot, without injuring others, does not automatically qualify as an aggravated murder under Utah law. If the death penalty is removed from consideration, it would significantly change the trajectory of the case. Plea negotiations, trial strategy, and public attention would all shift. If it remains on the table, the scrutiny will only intensify. Public reaction continues to shape the backdrop of this case. Online forums, social media platforms, and political commentators have dissected every detail from Robinson's alleged text messages to his political beliefs. Some see the case as ideological violence. Others warn against turning a criminal trial into a political symbol. Judges are trained to ignore that noise, but they are not immune to the consequences of public perception. A verdict seen as tainted by bias or procedural shortcuts could invite years of appeals, potentially forcing victims' families to relive the tragedy again and again. Legal scholars note that capital cases often collapse not because of lack of evidence, but because of early missteps. A single ethical violation, real or perceived, can unravel an entire prosecution years later. As of now, Tyler Robinson remains behind bars, awaiting the court's decision on whether the Utah County Attorney's Office will stay or step aside. That ruling alone could redefine the case before a jury is ever seated. One thing is certain. This case is no longer just about what happened on that rooftop or in that crowd. It has become a test of how the justice system responds when emotion, trauma, and law collide under the brightest spotlight. And as the next hearing approaches, the question remains unanswered: will this case deliver swift justice, or will it become another cautionary tale of a system struggling to balance fairness with fury?